Hello, everybody, and welcome to the discussion with Dr. Scott Jensen. My name is Andy Schmidt. I'm your host. I'm here with Lacy Johnson and Cicely Davis. Thank you guys for joining us. We're going to just jump right into this conversation. It's and just to be clear with everybody who's watching, we're just having a discussion. We're doing what politics don't usually do, is have discussions about things. Okay, so I want to start with you, Cicely. I think we've seen in Minneapolis, in the inner cities, how, well, in the last year and a half, I mean, a lot of it got torn to the ground, and we see public safety is, there's not much public safety. And so what do you see being the big issues with public safety in the cities right now in Minnesota?
Sure. So I'm going to start out. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you. I'm going to start out with a number, 76. As of Wednesday, 76 deaths in Minneapolis by gun shooting. And so what we're seeing is crime skyrocketing. We are seeing criminals emboldened, and we have a failing criminal system in Minneapolis. And so right now, at that trajectory, we're heading towards the category of war zone. It feels unsafe. It is unsafe. And the residents of Minneapolis, they have the right to feel safe in their beautiful city. They have the right to stand with their child at the bus stop. You can't plan for a stray bullet. And so when you know that a stray bullet is possible, and you know that a stray bullet has presence in your very own neighborhood, in your community, you're forced to make a choice. And that choice, for most people, is to stay inside, to not enjoy or partake in what your city and your community has to offer. And so you're imprisoned in your own community. And those are some of the changes that needs to happen. The people of Minneapolis are resilient. They are active. They are vital. They love what Minneapolis has to offer. All the culture and the diversity and the theaters and the stadiums and so much to do. And the criminals are taking over. And so what we need to do is have a champion leader who can say, hey, I'm a part of this. I understand. I'm going through it. I certainly don't want to see it turn into 77 or 78. And we need to empower our police force.
Yeah, that makes sense. Scott, so you're running to be the governor. And obviously we saw what happened in the last year, again, with just the destruction of the city. You saw Walz interacting with the mayor of Minneapolis in probably a not very healthy way. How can you interact? How can we lower crime? I mean, same question, but from your perspective.
Well, it's really nice to have Cicely's voice to this, because as she's running for Congress, we've now got someone who can really give us the hard facts and really take the temperature of what's happening in Minneapolis. I mean, there's definitely the question, if Minneapolis doesn't change direction, can it possibly retain what it has been to so many folks? I think at the end of the day, when it comes to public safety, we've got to focus on cops have got to be on the streets. Arguably, we're at 50% of where we should be. But I don't think that gets to work like flipping a switch, because once you take the genie out of the bottle, it's hard to get the genie back in. And this lawlessness is pervading Minnesota, really, more than just Minneapolis. So I think we got to have cops on the street. I think we need to realize that it doesn't matter if you're talking about police forces, education forces, private companies, medical clinics, hospitals. Reform is always taking place. So the notion that if the legislature doesn't come up with a compromise on a reform plan, that reform isn't happening, is just, I think, silly. I think that we need to know that incarceration has to be a deterrent. Arguably, we could say that in this country, 4.5% of the world's population incarcerates 20% of the world's incarcerated. So there's a problem there. So maybe we're incarcerating low-level crime, low-level criminals that should be more focused on rehabbing. But clearly, we cannot let go of the fact that for serious crimes, felons, shooting people, hurting people, if you've got a 5 to 10 to 15-year sentence, we can't let prosecuting attorneys and judges, if you will, plea bargain that down to a couple months. And I think we have to recognize that this is not just a Minneapolis problem. This is a Minnesota problem. It's bleeding into the suburbs. It's bleeding into any urban area. And it affects every community, every person. And lastly, I think it calls for engagement. And that's why I would just like to say right at the beginning, thank you, Lacy, and thank you, Cicely, for being here, because we're not hearing some of the voices that we should be hearing. We should be hearing, if you will, firm, clear messaging from the governor of Minnesota. But it's almost like, where's Governor Walz? And so instead, we're hearing your voices stepping into the vacuum. But Minnesotans need to hear the engaged voices of our leaders. And the reason they don't is sometimes because of fear and political pandering and, gee, I'm not sure how that'll play out in the election such and such. That's got to stop. But those are the things I think that you got to have cops, you got to realize reform's taking place, incarceration's got to be a deterrent. This is a Minnesota problem, and we need to have the people that have been elected to Minnesota offices engage and speak clearly.
Totally, 100%. Lacy, we just did a podcast with you, and it was fantastic, and you talked a lot about, what we just talked about with Scott and Cicely was kind of the government overview of what's going on here, but you talk a lot about personal responsibility, and that plays a role in crime and what's happening in the inner city too. Do you want to talk more about that?
Well, yeah, and I'll start off with personal experience because this issue, like just about every issue out there, is personal to me. I got a neighbor across the alley. He and his wife had one son, 25 years old, life ahead of him. He walks into a convenience store, I don't know, about 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago. Gang members come in, shoot up the store, kills him. My neighbor, people driving down the street shooting up houses. This same couple whose son was killed, they're drag racing on the street. And by the way, I'm in the epicenter of this, so this is not news stories to me. His car had previously gotten totaled out from drag races. The 3-year-olds, there were three 3-year-olds shot. One died recently. Well, the one that died, her father went to school with my youngest son. And another one that was shot, I know the grandparents. So all this stuff, these are personal things to me. So first of all, we got here because of bad leadership and just crazy ideas about law enforcement and what we owe people with grievances. Look, I don't care what your grievance is. It's no excuse to tear down, destroy a police station. It's no excuse to go looting other people's businesses. So that's where I come from. And getting back to the personal responsibility and accountability. Look, and I stand up in front of any audience and say this. Well, first of all, I don't know what problem we're trying to solve. I don't know what the goal is. And once again, my technical background. What are we trying to do here? What's our goal? The goal is no unintentional killings by the police? Are we only concerned about black lives? Is there a number? Do we realize that we got 700,000 police in this country with guns? And we got bad criminals out there, and every once in a while they're going to meet each other? So exactly tell me what is our goal there. So those are, and then finally, once again, I don't buy into this. I got black policemen. I've talked to them. We've been informed talking about this. And what they tell us, and I agree with them, what I say to my 2 sons that's from this neighborhood, and I had to raise and deal with this. First of all, don't break the law. Second of all, don't resist arrest. And third of all, and everybody tell you, make sure they see both of your hands at the same time. If we just did that, 90% of these issues will go away right away. Okay, so those are the type of things that gets into the personal responsibility and accountability and actually solving the problem where it's not some type of political campaign, it's not some type of social justice issue. No, this is about people I care about and I love. And so that's what we need to change the subject. And I was telling Scott, I went into some of these totally liberal white neighborhoods, and that's what I stood up and said. They had never heard that before, and you could see the difference come over their eyes. I can talk personally about this. So that's the way I feel about some of the safety issues going on here. And of course, I got a lot of great feeling for the business people down there. I know people who own bars and things in the warehouse district that's next to this Monarch where they shot up 10 people and one person got killed. I know all those people. I know who's involved. And then one last thing, I know the boots on the ground people. I know the ex-gang members who know the people who's doing this. And because of politics and everything else, the city is refusing to engage these people who these kids know, who are their cousins and their nephews and things that will listen to these boots on the ground people. They're hiring a whole different other group of people because of politics. who really don't know the problem. So I hope I didn't go too long on that.
No, you're fine. I mean, then that begs the question, like you asked, like, yeah, we talk about the problems. There's all these problems. You say, what's the goal? What's the solution? So I'll ask that to both of you. We'll start with you, Cece. What's the goal? What are we trying to get out of this? What's the solution? Put more cops on the street, do different programs? I mean, what's the goal here?
Yeah, I think that number one, we have to make sure that our community is safe, okay? If you live in a community that's not safe, and they'll leave. They'll simply pack up and leave. You'll see an exodus. If you are a business in a dangerous community, you'll move your business to a safer district, to a safer community. So I think that public safety is issue number one. And when you talk about public safety, and I'm talking about levels, I'm talking about police levels, we're talking about an MPD, a Minneapolis Police Department, that is down some 300 police officers. And so when I talk about that, I'd like to really put that in perspective. So if we were to take 300 police officers at their minimum, okay, and they typically work about 10 to 12 hours a day, but let's give them the minimum of 8 hours a day. At 40 hours a week, you're talking about 12,000 hours of unanswered criminality. How many bullets and murders could you stop in 12,000 hours? How many children could have been saved? How many carjackings could have been ceased? How many businesses would remain if the levels were where they need to be? And so putting that in perspective, we need the presence of police force so that people feel safe, so that businesses can thrive, so that people will participate in their community. So when I think public safety, I instantly think about getting to the base. And for me, that is rebuilding the staff of the Minneapolis PD. It is about having an absolutely responsible structure for the Minneapolis PD. We need reform to have a definitive definition. What is that definition of reform? I actually did a personal, you talk about personal experiences. I did a ride-along last night in a city in the district in Richfield, and I can tell you that police officers are absolutely tuned in to the needs of the public. They are making very snap decisions in a very few seconds, but the reason why they're out there, it's not because of the pay, okay? It's not because they're just looking for something to do. Every police officer that I met is out there because they care about the community, they want that community safe, and they want to protect citizens so that they can thrive, so that children can grow and have a future, so that businesses can thrive, and that they can trust that the community that they're growing in is one that is thriving, that it's vital. And so I saw criminals who disrespect our police officers, random citizens as we're rolling down the streets, just tossing up the middle finger. And so there's a blatant and general disrespect of our police force, and we need to get back to that. So when you say public safety to me, I think about getting our levels back. If we get our levels back, we have the police presence, we can get businesses to remain, we can get citizens to come out and participate in their communities, and we can offer our kids a future.
Totally. And Scott, you just went on a ride along as well. And I want you to answer the original question, like what's the goal? Because you just said it's not just a Minneapolis problem, it's a Minnesota problem. What's the goal when it comes to public safety in Minnesota? And also maybe after that, tell us about your ride along that you did recently.
Well, my ride-along experience just less than a week ago in the 5th precinct in Minneapolis, it actually informs my perspective of what our goal is. So they actually intersect nicely. I think our goal has to be to incentivize the behavior that will solve the problem. I don't think we can put an arbitrary number of police on the streets that'll fix the problem. I don't think that we can set a goal for reducing the homicides at a certain level and expect necessarily to reach that. I think we do so many things where we go counter to human nature. Human behavior is such that whatever you incentivize, that's probably your most likely outcome. So, as you mentioned, Lacy, if the governor and the mayor are willing to let the 5th precinct building burn to the ground, what they've incentivized, maybe not realizing it, is they incentivized a certain lawlessness in the spirit. that it doesn't matter, that we knew it was going to happen, but we said it can happen because when you look at the political cost and this and that, it's not worth it to fight for that. So we incentivize the wrong thing. So to Cicely's point, if we incentivize a thoughtful respectfulness for these people that live in our neighborhoods, go to church with us, we run into it at the grocery store, might have a beer with them during the Vikings game. If we incentivize just a reasonable, thoughtful behavior towards them, that'll go a long ways. But then if we incentivize that if you do crimes, there'll be a punishment. So I think our goal has got to be work within the constraints of human nature, because we have to do the same thing. Lacy and I were talking earlier about achievement gaps. What are we incentivizing? I just feel like, and I really want to, I guess I want to take a cheap shot, if you will, at some of our politicians. I just think that if you've been there a term or two, you should get it. That we got to stop the political pandering and just ask yourself, what are we incentivizing? What's the unintended consequence of me letting politics, as usual, run whatever our initiatives are? I don't think we're doing it. I think we've had great big chunks of money thrown at North Minneapolis, all kinds of tough neighborhoods. I don't see much really changing. And so I think we've got to start asking ourselves, and if the politicians won't, then we need Minnesotans to stand up and say, hold on, what are you incentivizing? What are you really going to do here? And I just think we have to ask that hard question.
Yeah, I think the challenge is solving these problems through politics. And I say that from the standpoint, I spent over 40 years in engineering, and you have to have a problem-solving methodology. If it's just pulling numbers out and looking at videos and hearing the story, that's going to fail almost every time. And you're basically, I guess in the world of poker, you're drawing to an inside straight, basically, if we got to put it in poker terms. And so we don't have that. And I say this because when the George Floyd thing happened, the first thing I did, give me some numbers. And I went out to the Minneapolis website, and I saw that between 2008 and 2019, there was over 4 million encounters between the Minneapolis police and the citizen. And out of that 4 million encounters, there was 11 killings. Now, I've forgotten the breakdown of white versus black, but when I did the math, I came out with something like 0.0012%. I'm like, wait a minute, how big of a problem is this? And then if you're realistic once again, and I'm kind of an old country boy, my common sense tells me if you got guns involved and people involved, if that happened enough, sooner or later somebody's going to get accidentally killed. You might even accidentally kill yourself. So I think the whole way we're going about this is unrealistic. I don't think we're going to ever solve it going this way. I think we got to put some responsibility on the people of the community. See, we're putting all the responsibility on the police. And I say to people, in my understanding of human nature, I don't know a problem that's ever been solved between two people with the attitude, if you just change, this problem going to go away. So for the last, Rodney King happened back in 91, over 30 years ago. And for the last 30 years, we've been saying to the police, if you just change, this problem going to go away. And we need to put some of the responsibility back on the people involved in here, because we see the behavior there. So those are the type of things. And by the way, the other thing, somebody got to have the guts to stand up and say this. And somebody got to have the guts to stand up and say to this community, look, you got to start obeying the law. You better stop fighting arrests. You got to make sure both of your hands. But right now, we're putting it all on the police, and I'm just convinced that'll never work. We're going to be sitting there around talking about this issue 30 years from now because we're going around about solving it the wrong way. In the other part of it, I'm not quite sure it's an issue. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when I look at the numbers, and I know that's a perception issue, and we need to respect the attitude and the experience of the people involved, and there's a way of doing that, and also getting them to understand that, look, we might not have to solve this, This might not be as big as this as you're saying, but somebody have to have the courage to say that.
I guess I'm struck too by it. And people may not want to hear this, but we are flawed creatures, and we make mistakes. I think of some of the horrific mistakes that I've seen in the world of medicine over the last 40 years. And that old saying, yeah, well, doctors, you bury your mistakes. At some level, that's not just a humorous statement. It's a true statement. We do. I mean, if there's a delay in diagnosis in diagnosing a woman's breast cancer, such that by the time we diagnose it, it's metastasized, there's a good likelihood that that person is going to die unnecessarily if we had been able to do it better. And I think that's why we're talking about the specific number of homicides. I've seen Australia respond to the pandemic with this notion of zero tolerance, zero COVID. I don't think that's doable. We'd love to have a flu season go by with no deaths. We'd love to have a week in Minnesota go by with no one dying of a heart attack. I think we have, in this country, every day in this country, 2 kids under the age of 12 will die in a car accident. I mean, 2 families somewhere in this country every day are devastated. Nobody wants to hear this, but I think we're going to have to sort of lean back into the notion that life is a fragile experience. And I mean, this COVID thing, COVID has been, in many ways, it does behave like a bad flu for some people. For some people, it behaves like an allergy season. But gee whiz, for some people, it's a ruthless, lethal intruder of the evening, and it comes in and kills you. And it kills people that there's no way in the world they could have anticipated that. And I sort of think that in America, we might have lost our way. And we have to recognize that there is this notion that we should leave the planet better than we found it, that we don't get to choose when we walk through that threshold into that next realm of human experience. And I feel like if we could just do that, if we could somehow recalibrate the way we evaluate our life experience, but it seems like we're so oriented to self. And we're supposed to leave this place a little better.
That's really important. I think, you know what, you both said something that was really, just made me tick, and I think about, thank you for starting out by saying that we're flawed. I think what you're talking about, and Lacy, pulling in what you're saying, is that I think there's an opportunity here to create a permission structure, okay? In that, you know what, I've always voted a certain way. This district has always voted this certain way. There's an education piece to this. My job as congressional leader, is to represent the people. And so we do need to lean on the people and say, hey, what is it that you truly want? I'm here to simply facilitate. I can't create miracles, but I can facilitate. If you can get together with me, we can come up with a policy that actually works. We can come up with programs in which those policies can be supported and be successful. But we create a permission structure for those people who said, you know what, I voted this way because, I voted for this person because, but you know what, I didn't get what I thought I was gonna get out of that. So you know what, I'm gonna open my mind and allow myself to view the next candidate, the next leader, hear what they have to say, and say, you know what, perhaps I got it wrong. You know what, I didn't get what I thought I was going to get, and now I'm gonna switch my vote, but I'm gonna hold that leader accountable and say, you tell me what you can do for me in this community. If we create that permission structure where it's not a blame, ha ha ha, you got it wrong, this is the wrong way to do it, I think that people would be willing to move and shift. And I think so important for my district in particular, that permission structure is needed. I think that there is a monolith of voting and mindset that we have an opportunity to change. And that change could be all the better, regardless of how you identify politically, where we can see actual change, policies that truly work within programs that can remain and have real sustainability and really truly bring back safety and vitality back to Minneapolis and surrounding communities.
Cicely, that's really important. What you just said is so powerful, because when you give the people the permission to say, you know what, maybe I got it wrong, if that could spill over onto the candidates, because I know that you're able to do that. You're able to say, you know what, this is where I thought the situation's real problem was, but I had it wrong. It's really over here. And I'm gonna challenge Lacy in a minute, because I know he's got something to say on that. But I think that your opponent, what I've not heard from her is I've never heard her say, you know what, I got it wrong. I said something that was outlandish and foolish, and it absolutely cut at the core of a group of people. I might have thought that I was speaking against a discrimination, and all I was doing was creating two more. So when you really hop on the fact that we are flawed, we're flawed as voters, we're flawed as candidates, we're flawed as elected officials. But earlier, Lacy and I were having a conversation, and we need to elevate what you said about folks. Sometimes, I don't care if you're talking about voters or candidates, about sometimes people have to quit looking out the window and instead look at the mirror. Yeah. I mean, doesn't that fit?
Oh yeah, yeah. It fits on every level, and we talked about perspective, attitude, and how we react to things, and the importance of faith. And a lot of times people hear faith and they think religious zealots or something, but to me, it basically boils down to there's something out there responsible for all of this, and it's bigger than me, and we got 100 billion galaxy out there with 100 billion stars, and we think about the way our brains work and how all this put together. And so with that kind of attitude, once again, you're looking in the mirror. And this also applied, and you mentioned the whole COVID thing, and I respect the attitude and reaction. Let's go back to faith. It's not consistent to be a faithful person and have a spirit of fear or stress or worry. And so when the COVID hit to me, and by the way, I don't pay attention to what they say on the newspaper. I go out and read. Every night I read studies. There were studies out there that they wasn't telling you about. And basically my attitude was, okay, I'll get it, get over with, and get on with my life. But just as important in that as talking perspective, look, every male member of my family was in the military. They fought for a lot of things that we're giving up now. And I'm like, if they put their lives on the line for us to have the type of freedoms that we have, for us to be the country that we are, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm not gonna be so afraid of dying that I want all the businesses shut down. I'm not gonna be so afraid of dying that I don't want everybody else to have their freedom. Because that's the way, to me, that's the way you serve your country. That's the ultimate sacrifice. And so when I look at what's going on now, we have too many people afraid and not enough people willing to sacrifice. And to, once again, from a faithful standpoint, to me, that's what it's all about. There's gotta be something out there you're willing to sacrifice and make the ultimate sacrifice for. And that's the way I was, because that's the way the male members of my family. My dad was in the D-Day invasion in World War II. So if he's willing to do that for me, I should be willing to do that for this country and the businesses and the families and everybody else for their personal freedom. And we know that a lot of things that they were doing was cutting into our personal freedoms. And we need to step up and say, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice. Businesses, stay open. Those people who are vulnerable, take all the extra precautions that you need to. And if we have to isolate you and give you free DoorDash and free cable or whatever until this thing is over, let's do that. But don't shut down the country. Don't make all these businesses go out of business. People have lost their life savings and things like that. So that's what's my whole attitude towards this, and it's still my attitude. And by the way, thank God I got it. I got over with it. I'm going on about my life.
Well, I have a question. Both of you talked about something. I think you talked about there was police interactions with over 4 million people, and then you had 11 deaths, and then the numbers like 0.0012% or whatever it is. And you talked about how when you were doing your ride along, people were flipping off the police officers. And my question here, kind of pivoting into more of how the media interacts with some of these things, is like, how can we combat then? And Scott, you've experienced this probably more than anybody. How can we combat the media just blowing things out of proportion to the point where your average citizen is seeing something like the George Floyd situation, and they're like, okay, this must be happening everywhere all the time, and then their emotional reaction, and it pushes it in. So Scott, like, how do you deal with the press? How do you deal with the social media and all that stuff? Because I mean, you've been hit hard by basically everybody's trying to get you, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I think at some level you have to wake up every morning and say, I'm going to start all over, because if you don't, what you do is you carry over from the night before all the baggage. And there's a statement, I can't remember who said it, but he said, yesterday ended last night. So I think when we wake in the morning, we got to go out and try to face the day's truth naked and unencumbered by all the baggage that we come to. I think the media has got to be at some level challenged. And I think we can do that without being rude. I think we can. I was being interviewed the other day, and they asked me a question. I said, are you asking me that question because you really want my answer? Or is that just a gotcha moment? Because I said, you know the answer to the question already, and you know that there is no answer. But it seems to me you're waiting to see if you can pounce. And I think we can have a relationship with these media people because we need them to recognize their flaws too. They're not behaving like Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather. They're behaving like some purveyor of salacious recordings or reportings. They're not interested necessarily in, if you will, pursuing the solutions. They're not. So I think we have to keep pushing. On social media, it's challenging because you can get dinged or put in jail for Facebook for a weekend. You really don't know the answer. They put 25 pages and say, these are the rules, and they're very ambiguous. And so you look and say, well, which rule exactly did I follow? And we would never do that in a court of law. You know, there's some precision. This is what you did. This is why you're being tried for this. So I think that we need to keep being measured and balanced and having the conversation and if you will, softly, gently challenging people in the same way that we'd have a conversation perhaps with a dear friend or a significant other. And I just refuse to go down that other path where I become a jaded cynic and angry. I'd rather be at some level a little bit naive, maybe a bit of a country bumpkin, and just say, you know what, it sure sounds to me like you were trying to sort of pick on me or be unfair to me, but I'm going to just let that pass. Let's have a conversation. And I just don't know how else we could do it.
Well, Cece, I want to ask you, because it feels like the media's got some sort of control over how people are thinking about things. And so your opponent is the mastermind of basically victimizing everybody and making everybody feel like it's, everybody else's problem is not my problem. And so that's a huge hill. Like, and what can you even do about that, especially in the cities and in your district? What can you do to get people's mindset to kind of shift to be like, hey, maybe it's not everybody else's fault. Maybe I should take some responsibility here. Right. You know what I mean?
I think you just hit it. So I think number one, we pursue truth, right? What is the actual reality of what's going on? I think that we keep bringing up this mirror, and that mirror is really important because when you turn that mirror around, you just have nothing but absolute, right? The mirror can only show what's actually reflecting back the image it sees, right? And so when we talk about my opponent, who divides, who incites, right? She is someone who doesn't speak truth. She's not transparent, and her interest is simply to drive a radical agenda. But you turn it to the people and you say, you know what? She's just one person. We are a democratic republic, and what that means is that the power still lies in the people. She's just one person. The majority is in the people. So we ask questions and we say, is your life better under these policies? Is your life better under that program? What have you actually received? What's been tangible that's actually made your life and our lives better in this community? And if you're coming up with answers that are less than satisfactory under that leadership, as a democratic republic, and as our Constitution is set up, we put in new leaders, right? But we got to get the people to understand that as a democratic republic, we are empowered by we the people. And so we have a role, the people have a role in the outcomes of their very own community. And if you don't like the leadership, you take them out and you stick someone else in, and you continue that process until you're getting the results that you desire. This country is exceptional because of that we the people notion and putting that into practice. And so for the people, if the mindset is, I have a problem, government fix it, then I can tell you we have strayed off the path of the notion of we the people. And so we hold our leaders accountable. My opponent is interested in one thing, that is eradicating all things America. Okay, taking down our statues, defunding our police, and she will do anything and everything to keep people in that mindset. And so the people have to make a decision, get together and decide, we want something different, and if you can't give it to us, which she truly has proven that she can't, put in new leadership.
It seems like, but I'm 22, I'm a Gen Z, and people in my generation are all like, they're all jacked up on this ideology, this like liberal mindset, victim mindset. And so I guess, we talked about it a little bit on our podcast, and it's like, how can we get these younger people to be like, to actually look in the mirror. I know that we can talk about you should look in the mirror, but how do you get them to actually look in the mirror? Because if there's one thing you can tell, go look in the mirror, and then they'll be like, okay, thanks for the advice, see you later. And that's usually what happens. So, and I'm not saying that's the politician's responsibility totally, but I mean, we talked about
There are
this.
so many fundamentals involved here, and we got to appreciate them. First of all, the media is profit motivated. Zucker, the head of CNN, is on record saying we can't say anything bad about Obama because people will stop watching. So that's what we're dealing with, the money motive in the first place. The second thing, I think about a couple of quotations. One was from, I think, Ben Franklin, we gave you a democracy if you can keep it. And Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War kind of backing on the Bible, a house divided cannot stand. And so there are people who are making money on this division and some of these things in the media and things like that. And as far as your generation, and look, I see the effect it's had on my children. And I raised them totally different. And it seemed like it's watering down. Where I'm getting to is this. Look, we got an educational system that's feeding this to these young people, all of pop culture, media, and so everything, all the system is designed to instill that type of philosophy on them. And once again, if you listen to me, I'm always talking about fundamentally what we have to do to get rid of this. So some kind of way, we're gonna have to get to the people, hearts, souls, and minds, and it's gonna be very challenging. I don't think we understand how tough it is. To overcome what they're being educated with. Because once again, I've seen it in my children, and I know how effective it can be. My son, and I saw it coming when my son was in elementary school, when he came home and said, Dad, my teacher said, you shouldn't be doing this, and you should be doing that. And I thought about my upbringing. There is no way in the world I would have come into my home and ever told my parents what the teacher said they should and shouldn't be doing. But once again, like I say, there's a lot of dots to connect here when the family is disintegrated and you don't have the type of parenting and leadership I had, then where you're getting your ideas from is the public school system. There's no checks and balances there. See, our parents were our checks and balances. We didn't care how much violence we saw on TV. We weren't going to think about killing each other because our parents taught us differently and because of our faith. So we really need to understand what's all involved here fundamentally, what we're up against, and what it's going to take to undo it. And I'm just concerned that they've been at it for 40 years, putting these things in place.
Right. And Cece talked about the truth. Yeah. Scott.
Well, I think take that mirror from Lacy and your permission. See, and I think, and then in your comment about the Gen Zs, if you put all those together, what strikes me is that if we can convince people to look in the mirror and instead of looking for answers, to look for questions. Because I think if we can get them to ask the questions, then I think what'll happen is they might come to a point where they give themselves permission to maybe be less cynical. Maybe say, gee, I had it wrong. I'm gonna think this, I'm gonna read this book. I've never read George Orwell. I'm gonna read 1984 because I need to understand, or this book. And I think that there's a magic there that if we could just have people look in the mirror, don't look for an answer, look for a question, so that in trying to find the right questions, maybe then we give ourselves permission to be a different people. Then we're all of a sudden saying, I'm not going to vote this side because I always do that, or this side because I always do that. We say, I'm going to let this be a new adventure. I'm going to let this thing unleash me. Because I think at some level, Americans are ready to be unleashed, because what's happening over the last 18, 20 months for sure is unsatisfactory, but really it goes past longer than that. We've been moving in this direction and we can see it. Sometimes it takes, if you will, a monumental event for us to recognize that, gee whiz, this is just the outpouring of something that if I'd really been sharp, I might have picked up on it earlier.
Well, I love what you had to say about the family as well. It's like about the family too, but I think at the political level, my question, maybe I'll start with you, and then Cece, you can jump in. And you talked about the truth. It's like we just got to stick to the truth, and I agree with that. And I think part of that is transparency, and it's something that you've tried to do your best in this campaign. That's like a dangerous thing to do now, but I think what are the positive aspects of just being a transparent politician, which seems like an oxymoron, because I don't know many.
Well, I'd say there's 3 words worth commenting on within your question. First, obviously I have to comment on truth, but the other one is transparency and the other one is trailblazing. I think if you really want truth, you have to recognize its essential nature. And its essential nature is that it's declared more often than it is. Because so often what we say is truth isn't. It's our truth today. It might be your falsehood today. It might be your truth tomorrow. We might flip. But the fact of the matter is, real truth probably is not evanescent in nature. It's really there. So I think we have to be a little more cautious about, well, I know what the truth is. No, you know what your perspective is. So I think we have to, and if we can be that transparent about it, then I think we have to even go to the First Amendment and realize that the First Amendment doesn't just protect your speech when you think you're speaking truth, because your truth could be your lie. First Amendment has to protect both of you, and we have to recognize that. That's being transparent. But the way out of both that conundrum with truth and transparency is the last one. It's trailblazing. If we're willing to trailblaze these issues and have the hard conversations and have what you said, Cicely, ask the question, maybe I got it wrong. Could I be wrong here? Maybe I need to rethink this. Because if we're really willing to trailblaze, we can get to that point and say, hey, you know what? You're right. I hadn't considered a couple of those things. I mean, I think we're going to have to do that as we try to get on the other side of this pandemic. Is we're going to have to, people are going to have to say, you know what? You had it right. I was misaligned. I was focusing on this, and there was all this I could have focused on differently. So that's where I'm at with that whole issue of truth and transparency and trailblazing. And I think that it's the voter who's going to or not going to give us permission to behave that way. Because if they want better candidates, they're the ones that are going to determine our behavior.
How are you going to be transparent? I guess that's pretty straight up. I got to ask you, how are you going to be transparent? Because I know, that was a great answer, and I think that it's just important to just ask people, if you're going to run for office, I think the people deserve to know what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to be transparent?
Yeah. So, for me, fortunately for me, standing against my opponent with regard to truth is a pretty easy plight. She has tweeted out things that have been hateful and racist. She has evoked emotion in people just to be divisive. And so right now, I can be that soft place to land for my district, which feels really great. The people of my district, they are politically fatigued, okay? The infighting that's going on in the Democratic Party is one thing, but last year, between COVID and the riots and the unrest and the presidential fighting, when I talk to the people of my district, they are politically fatigued. They are tired, and they're looking for someone who can come in and just calm things down and really help them focus on enjoying their communities. They want someone who can come in, calm things down so that they can enjoy their children and go back to the Vikings game and enjoy their communities again. And so who's going to step up and be that champion? I can do that. I'm willing to do that. That's actually my job, is to represent the voice of the people. And so, the simple answer is to not be a racist, to not incite, to not divide, but to really make sure that the people in my district understand that I am their neighbor and that we stand shoulder to shoulder every day. And I'm out there in the communities with you, and I'm at the park with you walking my dogs, and I'm out there running and at the Stone Arch Bridge like everyone else. And so, you know what? I am that soft place to land. You can come to me. We can have that conversation. This community is not at all lost, but you have a role in this. You have to put in a new leader. You have to put in new leadership that's truly interested in this community, in its success, in its vitality, in its safety. And if we do that, if we get rid of this radical agenda, we can just get back to being Americans. We can just get back to being the people of this district. We can get back to a better state. We can get back to just being Minnesotans. We like hockey. We drink beer. right? We're Vikings fans, we're Gophers fans, we're Twins fans.
Unfortunately.
We actually have a very responsible, robust education system here. We stand out in the country for our education here in Minnesota. Let's get back to that, and we can if we pluck out this radical agenda that's going on.
Great. Yeah, and I think we're kind of wrapping things up, but I want to ask kind of one more question. We'll kind of go around and talk about this one by one. I'll start with you, Lacy. You talked about education, and that's a huge thing, and there's issues in education, and we kind of talked about it in our podcast too. If you want to quickly, each of you give, what do you think the main issues in education right now in Minnesota are? And then what are some solutions? Maybe something like that as quickly as possible, and then we'll kind of move around. I know that's...
I'm not going to go as quickly as possible, so I'm running you up front.
I know that, yeah.
But even, the reason I say that, just one last thing on this truth thing. Yeah. Once again, from a problem-solving methodology, I don't get into all of that, or how you feel, or justice and stuff. What I try to do is that, can we agree that this is an issue or problem, and let's come together and see, can we solve it? What's your solution? What's my solution? And by the way, I'm willing to try your solution. Most of the time I know it's not going to work. And so it's more to me about problem solving and coming together, agree there's a problem, how do we go about it solving? Education, wow. First of all, I'm being as quick as I can.
I know, yeah, thank you.
I told you I was from Natchez, Mississippi. People tend to think of the South as backwards and bad education system and things like that. I had the best K through 12 education system you could think of. And I look back on what were the features of it. And by the way, I started up a charter school. We took some of the kids that nobody wanted in North Minneapolis, 4-year-old and on up. At the end of the school year, they were in the 85th percentile nationally from an education standpoint. So let me just say this. First of all, you got to look at yourself, looking in the mirror. Don't give yourself any excuses for not educating these children. If these children are not educated, it's not because the parents aren't involved and not because of anything. It's because we're not doing our job. So that's one thing. The second thing is that you have to have the same high expectations of these children as these children, students out in Wayzata from rich family, because to me, it doesn't matter what kind of family you're from. It doesn't matter what your economic level. We're going to educate you. And then the other thing is you have to have respect for the importance of the family, because you have to embrace the issues in the family. Because if you think about it, no matter what you do at that classroom during the day, if you send this kid back to a bad environment and stuff, and you're in a bad family and they're not involved, it's going to undo everything. Second, and I can go on, but I'll end it with this, and we can sit down and talk about that, because I know education. We have to have classes and things that evoke the kids' interest in that they're willing to perform, and high expectation of the children too, no excuses, and confidence in them that they can do this. And you got to project that, and you got to be sincere in it. And I was telling someone earlier, when I look at these children, I say, look, this is what I did, this is where I came from. Just like I can do it, you can do it. And get rid of excuses like racism and white privilege, and I don't want to hear that. And so those are just some of the things I think we can do. But I can sit down and write a story. In fact, call me arrogant or whatever, I think I'm going to be the greatest education expert in the country as far as closing the achievement gap. I don't think anybody can teach me anything about it, because I know the people, I know the school, I know what works, I know what doesn't work. I know this attitude of feeling sorry for these kids and lower expectations, that they're living up to that. So that's just my quick answer.
That's why we brought you on. We brought the greatest education expert in the country on.
Yeah.
That's why we did.
I hope I didn't go on too far.
No, it's fine. Scott.
Well, if you take the 30,000-foot look at education, I'd say the first priority should be to prepare the student. The second priority should be to preserve the original intent of your educational system, which I think is to provide a foundation of good citizens. That's why we have compulsory education, and that means the reading, writing, arithmetic, knowing history, knowing how to be a good citizen. But I think you want to preserve the original mission, and then I think you want to protect the nation. You want to protect the individual, you want to protect their dreams. And if you don't prepare them and preserve the mission of education, you're not going to be able to protect that child's opportunity to dream dreams and go out and make those dreams happen. That's the 30,000 foot view. But if you wanted to get down to a micro level, I could almost take a person that maybe I diagnose someone with diabetes. What would a successful journey with that patient look like from a patient's perspective? Obviously, I'm going to play a significant role, but I got to make the right diagnosis. Once I do that, I then have to say, before we do any pills or before we do any insulin, you need to understand the foundation of what your disease is. And if I can't do that, then the patient's going to fail. So they have to understand, whether it's not enough insulin or the insulin's there, but there's a resistance in the body to it. They have to understand the underlying nature of the disease, what might have caused it. Was it heredity? Was it choices? We have to do the education piece, but we have to prepare them. And then we have to intervene. And we have to say, these are what you need to do. If you can achieve this, boom, 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 problem solving, boom, boom, boom. And the outcome then will be what we want. It will be that diabetic having a life that's pretty darn normal, almost comparable to someone who doesn't have diabetes, and people may not even know. I mean, I think we could use that metaphor, that if we do that right, if we do education right, then I think we're there.
Yeah. Education. Well, when I think of education, I think about, the public school system. And right now, as Americans, we are funding a failing monopoly, right? Zip code dictates the education of the child, and that shouldn't be. And so it makes zero sense to continue to send a child to a school system that's failing them, teachers that are failing them, a school system that's failing them. And then we push them into society, and then we have an unrealistic expectation off of a foundation they didn't receive. And so that needs to change. We need to allow parents to decide where children go. We need to fund children, not school systems. We need to empower those teachers who actually care. And we don't hear that enough. We don't hear about teachers who actually care. We have subject matter in our schools right now that are radicalizing our children in critical race theory. That doesn't belong, at least at the very minimum. It doesn't belong in K through 12 education, okay? We're raising little socialists and we're putting them out. So that needs to go. We have to get back to teaching children what you're talking about, Scott, the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic. The role of education is to build responsible citizens who will then go out and pay that forward into a successful society. And so we need to teach them civics. We need to teach them the entire good, the bad, and the ugly of our history. We need to teach them what their value is, and we need to give them lessons that will help them succeed. And so that subject matter, as far as electives go, besides sports, it would be financial, how to own homes. It needs to be surrounded around perhaps, what society should be and things like that, but in a way that doesn't parent, right? There's a role for parents and a role for education. And so I think that if we actually just got back to the basics, making sure that children understand who they are, empowering them within our system, getting rid of subject matter that tears at them and doesn't build responsible citizens, I believe our rank in America with regard to where we are on the globe, that'll get back up. It will rise. That to me is tragic. It's not lost. We can't wave our white flags, but we have to accept that there's something really failing that's going on, and there needs to be a very serious intervention from parents, from teachers, from the entire school system, and we're back to that permission structure. It's failing. We have to look at that and admit it so that we can change it. We do that, we'll be successful.
Well, I got a question for you. Go ahead.
Just do a little follow-up on that, because I am passionate about education, and CC hit on a couple of things. I'm just convinced, and keep in mind I've been all over the country talking to education experts and things like that, that the achievement gap in these inner cities will not be solved by educators She mentioned school choice. I think somewhere down the line we're going to have vouchers, because I have a lot of confidence in the creativity and incentive of business people. I think things like how we look at these kids, and I tell everyone, if you hear an educator talk about, I need more money, we need smaller class sizes, I think I would not trust that educator to solve the issue. Because really the real issue is your relationship to those children, your expectations of them, and things like that. So I just like to get that in place. And when I say to people, and I mean it with all my heart, give me a piece of chalk and a chalkboard. And all these kids that you say you can't educate, send them to me. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And by the way, you notice I say chalk and chalkboard. That tells you I'm old school. Yeah. But really, it's not as complicated as it appears. But the people that's in our education system, they're being taught by the colleges that has this liberal, you sorry poor folks, and we can't have too many expectations of you. So we have to change all of that. And I'll just end and say, just like most of these issues, there are so many moving parts to them. And the reason we don't solve them, we don't understand all the moving parts to these things, and we don't connect the dots. And education is a typical example of where that's occurring. And so I don't have confidence in hardly anybody to solve this thing anytime soon. Because you really got to understand what you're doing and all the dots out there and connect it.
I think I'll ask a question to you, and we're talking about education. I think there's a learning opportunity right here, right now. You ran the same race that you're running right now. What advice would you give? Try to be short.
I'll be short.
Try to be short.
I can be short on this one.
We don't need too
I got a canned short answer on that one.
Well, what advice? What things did you learn? What advice would you have?
Well, I'll keep it short. I think the two basic lessons is, and I've talked to people, you got to understand, attack, and defeat the system. There's a corrupt system in place here in Minneapolis, across the country. But it can be done. And secondly, you have to go over the head of the media and go directly to the people and boots on the ground and knowing the people in that community and establish some type of personal rapport where they respect you and they know that you're out there for their best interest and not because you want a political career or you want to be famous or anything like that. To let them understand you're in this because you care about them. So those would be the two things. Understand the system, the corrupt system, attack it and defeat it. And it can be done, and go over the head of the media and go directly to the people and let them know who you are and how you feel about things and have your great ideas. So that'll be what I would say to CC. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to end on a positive note, talking about politics. It's just not always fun. So we got to end on a positive note. I'm going to ask this question because the one thing that you three have in common is that you guys have lived in Minnesota. I don't know exactly how long, but longer than me. I've only been here for a couple months. What is your favorite thing about Minnesota? This is a very easy question. You can basically answer whatever you want. I'll start with Cece. We'll go to Lacy, and we'll go to Stop. I'm sorry. Yeah, I should give you some time. Yeah, what's your favorite thing about this state? Yeah. And maybe about Minneapolis specifically, whatever you want.
Well, you know what? I can answer your question about the state. I can answer for the entire state. I'm originally born in Rochester, New York, and moved to Minnesota in '87. And Minnesota has a core value system in its people that resonates with me. It's honest, it's genuine, and they're conscious of the homeland. It's clean, it's serene, it's the kind of state where you don't have to lock your doors. Neighbors help one another. People believe in civics, and when you're asked to arrive at 9 a.m., people arrive at 8:40, okay? And that's considered on time. And so there's a value system in Minnesota that I truly value here. Outside of all the physical, we have clean lakes and green spaces and things like that. There's a value system. There's a value in Minnesotans that I will always refer to myself as a Minnesota girl, even though having the genesis in New York, because that's where my formative years have been spent. And so I like the value of what Minnesota has put into me, and that will last a lifetime.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to pick it back on what she's saying, I think the people and the value is really key. I think I'm from down south and I see the same type of values. and that's the agriculture system where you get up early, you work hard, you obey the law, and you have just good values. So that's what I like about the people of Minnesota. I think their hearts are in the right place for the most part. I think we have to overcome this whole liberal kind of philosophy and way of looking at the world. But it's the people, I think, and it's a good place, well, it used to be. Now they're destroying it now, and they've destroyed Minneapolis now. A good place to raise a family. It was a good educational system, and you just have quite a bit of diversity here, at least recently, that you don't have. So the value in the people and things like that, and it reminds me of down south where I had a good, basic, almost perfect childhood, and I see that in the people in Minnesota and the Midwest and the South have a lot in common. So I love it for those reasons.
That's awesome. Scott?
Great answers. I'm going to pivot just a little towards courage. I think that Minnesota's been nation leading in so many ways because we had the courage to do so. I think in the 1960s, as the whole civil rights movement was going across the nation, Minnesota didn't just go along. In our own way, we led. We led in the Midwest. I remember in the 70s when I was at college, I remember having a chance to build relationships with black folks. There were no black people in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, where I grew up, and I spent my whole life there. I mean, we thought international cuisine was a pizza. And so when I was in the 70s, I remember asking, and I remember quite a few Gopher football players, and I remember said, "You're playing football here, why?" They said, "Because Minnesota is a place that's really embracing in a genuine way. It isn't just sort of pandering to a public perception or virtue signaling. It's really authentic." And then I remember in the 80s, we really started to rock and roll in Minnesota in terms of, if you will, medical innovation. And we had this medical alley where we have all kinds of medical service companies. We have Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota and all these medical industries. I mean, yeah, maybe San Jose is the tech center of the country, but Minnesota has been a leader. We've been nation leading. In the 80s and 90s, we were always regarded, as you had said, Cicely, that we were a leader in K through 12 education. We were willing to lead. And I think it's hard to lead without courage. We're going to have to lead again. And right now, I think there's a lot of bumping up. But I would like my campaign, and if we can be successful, I would like to lead on conversations about conservation. And what does that look like? I don't think it looks like bickering about climate change. I think it looks like talking about water and preserving the land and leaning into the stakeholders that live off the land and recognizing that people that live in the northern Iron Range know very well how important the land is, and they want to be able to mine, and they'll do it responsibly. In greater Minnesota, they want to be able to farm, and they'll responsibly take care of the farm. They didn't really need urban dwellers to go out and tell them to rotate crops. They figured that out a long time ago. But I think that if we can do that and lead on conservation topics and lead on the fact that we will protect the consumer. In this day and age, with big pharma being as big as it is and big tech canceling people, we need to protect the consumer of the pharmaceutical products, the consumer of the big tech products. And then lastly, we need to recognize, and the Republican Party struggles with this, but we need to recognize that in protecting the consumer, we have to be willing at times to control the corporate structure. Because there's monopolies out there that are absolutely smothering us. They'll decide, look at the tech monopoly. They will decide what we can look at, what we can talk about, what we can learn about, what we can chew on. They're deciding our very appetite. So somehow Republicans are going to have to recognize it. We've got to step in. And in the same way that we don't let our energy companies double our electricity rates every month, there's times where, as Teddy Roosevelt said, you got to control the corporate structure. If they're monopolizing the game, you can't let them do it. So I think Minnesota has enough courage that we can be nation leading again, but we have to embrace it.
Great. I love those. I love all those answers. That's awesome. I want to say thank you guys again for joining us. I want to give it up. So you have Bright Lights podcast. People should go check that out. I listen to it. It's awesome.
Every Wednesday, 7 p.m.
Perfect.
Yep.
Bright Lights podcast.
LacyJohnson.com, by the way.
LacyJohnson.com. We'll put it in there. You want to give all your websites, all that kind of stuff?
Yes, on Twitter and Instagram, I'm Cicely Davis, MN, and it's CicelyDavis.com. I spell it with a C, CicelyDavis.com.
Perfect. And we got the DrScottJensen.com This will be out on Facebook and YouTube. Check out the Dr. Scott Jensen podcast. Am I missing anything? Follow, like, subscribe.
I would just love to encourage anybody who watches this to remember that Cicely said, we can find permission to do things different, to do things better. And I think that one of the ways we do that is we do what Lacy said. We look in the mirror, and then we do what I asked. Instead of looking in that mirror for answers, we look for the right questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you all for watching. And we hope to see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.